Hi, I'm Reggie Harris, and I'm running for Cincinnati City Council in 2021. Welcome, Gus, to the podcast, the Reggie for Cincinnati podcast. It's really funny to welcome you to this podcast because it's like as much your baby as it is mine. It's something that we sort of dreamt up together, but because I am the host, I get to welcome you to this thing you helped create. So I'm super excited to chat with you. So for folks who don't know you, introduce yourself, what you do for the campaign, and how we came to be, how this duo came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Gus Ricksecker. I moved to Cincinnati. I'm also a transplant to the city, just like you, to go to the University of Cincinnati. I studied urban planning, but ultimately went on and got my master's in philosophy. So, it's a non-traditional route, but I think most generally speaking, what my interest is solving urban problems. Getting to the root at how we can make cities more equitable and sustainable. And so I did some campaign work a couple of years ago for a city council candidate, and then about a year ago, to where we are now, we were introduced, and you had just announced that you were gonna run, like not officially announced the campaign, but I helped out with some of your fundraising, and then come November when we did that epic launch video, and you announced your candidacy, I was very happy to move into the campaign manager role, and it's been a fun ride so far. I'm happy to be on the podcast after editing and watching all these other episodes so many times.
I know that's so funny. So, guys, tell me this. One of the things that I think I ultimately really appreciate about you, but I think also drives me up a wall, is like you're very measured, and you're like you don't rush into things. You consider things, and I'm kind of like, let's do it, and you're like, ah. But what was the moment for you where you were like, okay, this is the campaign, I'm gonna work on this campaign, I'm going to deal with Reggie's shenanigans. What was that moment like for you, or what was that process like?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people my age especially are very motivated to help in some way, shape, or form. The city and the community they live in, and it's hard to find a medium to effectively do that. And I know politics isn't my favorite work by any means, and I think running for office is it's fun in some ways, but it's very frustrating in other ways. And what I've been especially appreciative of with this campaign is that I feel like my time and effort is being put towards something that is ultimately really helping the city. And you're somebody that I feel very comfortable getting behind and putting my name behind. And that it took a little while. It took a little while of both of us learning each other, both of us learning how we operate, as well as our kind of system of values and backgrounds that we're coming from. But once we got that level of comfortability and it just kind of clicked, I think that there's no other job that I'd rather have right now than pushing this campaign across the finish line and getting you into office. It's really it's quite the journey, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
I appreciate that. You're right. So, okay, so let's go in. Right? What was a moment where you were like, you know what? I'm not messing with Reggie right now. He getting on my nerves. Because listen, I know, I know myself. So, what was a moment where you were like, you know what? This joker crazy.
I think so we went all out for the launch video. For those of you listening that haven't, watched the full video, it was a project to put that together. There's a lot of moving parts, and then the live component of that was arguably even more confusing than the video itself. We had like 10 different things going on, and nothing ever goes exactly according to plan, especially when you have that many moving parts. And I think the like week leading up to your launch, the going through and helping edit the videos, making sure that everything was ready for the launch itself, dealing with like technical problems. And then, during the launch, also when the heater went off and made that noise, and I had to run downstairs and get it. And I could see that you wanted like the event to be like perfect, and this was really like frustrating you. But I think that moment of, us pulling that together and us doing this event, and then the just astounding feedback that we got afterwards, that was a critical moment, I think, in both, me feeling comfortable in the campaign and feeling like my role is more established, and then also, because we were just still really meeting each other at the time, you gaining my trust and making sure that, our relationship was as effective as it could possibly be. Because I lost sleep. I got migraines that week. I was like, I don't know if this is the job for me, but then we did it. We put together a great event, and it was really successful, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. No, I remember when you got migraines. It was an insane week, and then it was also the week in which like the time in which like COVID cases were spiking, and we had been really working, putting this campaign remotely throughout this entire process. And for anyone who has worked on the campaign, you can imagine our pain. If you haven't worked on the campaign, like it's actually really difficult to build and to create bonds and relationships like when you're buffered by Zoom. And so it was like stressful because we had to be in the same room with each other to bring this across the finish line. But then like the rates were going up, and like it was like sort of reinforcing all these mask mandates, so that added to it. But I agree with you that was a pivotal moment. I think there was also a pivotal moment in and I would love to hear this from your perspective, in our relationship where, so there's an age difference between us. When you're young, you're 24, I'm 39, and, and like an experienced, dynamic there. But you have to like manage me, right? Like you have to say no. You have to say you have to do these things, and I think that there is what was it like? It's not that I didn't want to be managed. Maybe I didn't want to be managed, or I don't want to be managed, but I didn't know what it meant to be managed. And then like we had like a very intense conversation. And I was like, but you have to just take, like, no, it was about me. Like, you just have to take control. Like I am one of those persons, I'm like a person in the wild. Like you have to exert sheer dominance before I give up control. And I think from my perspective, you're kind of like, Reggie, I'm not like that. But I was like, but you need to be. I would love to hear, how you experience that moment.
Yeah, well, for full clarity, you are one of the easier people as far as I feel much less obligated to manage in many circumstances, because I trust your judgment on things from social media, which a lot of people, you can't trust their judgment on social media these days, but also to the way that you conduct yourself in meetings and in when you're out talking to new people, or building relationships. I feel a deep trust that you're going to say the things that you need to say to, get those people as a part of the coalition. That being said, there are those moments where there's management needed. And I think the interesting dynamic that's been playing out between us is that, I definitely, like you said, stay back, observe, try to think things through before saying something. And so I think the biggest thing for me has just been as long as you give me time to think about something, then I'll give you the honest feedback you need. Sometimes though we do need that feedback in the moment, and I think that's where I struggle sometimes is when you need something from me right at that exact time. But all in all, I feel very fortunate to be on a campaign and with a candidate that, really, I step in every once in a while, but for the most part, you're very easy to manage, and that, um, we have our internal conversations that happen, but especially externally, like this is a very clean campaign. I feel like we do our due diligence in making sure that we're meeting people where they're at and using inclusive language and really connecting with people in a way that they'll leave feeling like it was meaningful. And so
Yeah.
on that end, I don't really have to do much managing. You do an excellent job of that. Um,
Oh, well, I
yeah.
appreciate that. I think that we also had we've like our relationship has evolved because it's really important to me, and I guess I sort of realized this during the evolution of our relationship about having that very sort of like close personal connection, and like feeling like we know each other as people, like, and we are in tune to each other emotionally. And so, and then you rightfully made the observation that that's really hard because we were not meeting in person. And so we started, obviously safely meeting in person. And, now we talk every day, multiple times a day. Like, there's this like forced intimacy. Like, I don't, like, I think like second to my husband, like you were the person that I talked to the most.
Mhm.
Like I was like looking at my call log the other day, and it was like 12 calls to you, like in this day. But like, I'm curious, like, so we had a series of moments where our relationship has grown, and I was like, oh, Gus, I love you. I was like, yeah, that's where we are. Like like we are really building. So a campaign is building an organization, and we're building an organization that ultimately will lead to a position to be able to help shape the city. And we both are very much like process policy people. We sort of complement each other in the way that we come to that work, and we both are very passionate about cities. And so, in my mind, I just don't see how that can be built without love, right? Like, how can one build a place that we want cities to be compassionate. We want cities to be providing. We want cities to be places where people can thrive. And so love has to be a component of that. Like, not to be so wishy-washy, but it felt, and so I think that the moment where that became a part of our relationship, it also helped solidify and sort of gel like the work. What
Mhm.
what do you
Yeah.
what do you
I
think?
Yeah, I think that something that a lot of people don't realize to one of your earlier points is that a lot of campaigns don't have physical spaces right now where they can interact in meaningful in-person ways, not only with like your campaign staff, but also with, those are spaces that the community can come in and you can have kind of deeper interactions with them. And so right now, I think in some sense, there's a shared struggle amongst candidates running, and that it all feels a little more superficial this election because you're screen facing most of the time. And so, absolutely, I'm looking forward to in the coming months as vaccination rates are going up, and of course the weather's getting nicer, having more of those more intimate interactions with people. But to your point, I think that what's unique potentially about local politics and what I love about local politics is that it's not about, you know, stringing these huge meta narratives and talking points and like presenting yourself as this like messiah figure, almost that people will rally behind. It's about showing your true and authentic self and getting people to trust you. And to me, when I think of like as much of a loving relationship as you can get between City Hall and your constituents, it's one where the citizens feel like you're their family and that they can go to you with problems, that they trust you to make decisions on their behalf. And I think the current political climate, especially as you go further up to the state and national levels, it's more about rallying behind these particular points. And I think one thing that I've appreciated about this campaign so far, and that I appreciate about local politics, is you're exactly right. Like, there needs to be this compassion and this mutual transformation that you talk about between citizens and their elected officials. And that comes from a closeness, from a feeling of intimacy with your local government that you just can't get at the other levels. And so absolutely. And as we are able to do more in-person stuff, I'm sure that we'll foster more of those relationships with people than is probably possible over Zoom or something.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up this idea of mutual transformation, and so I just want to shout out the National Association of Social Workers. There's an anti-oppression informed practitioner training, and I'm certified, and I also am a trainer. And one of the tenets of this sort of anti-oppression practice is this idea of mutual transformation. And what I think is so incredible about that is that, and particularly in politics, like that mutual transformation means that the relationship is in one way, right? There isn't just like, folks who are decision makers then making decisions and then, people who are, constituents and residents are then impacted. But it is policymakers, and City Hall has to also be transformed by the work, right? That both parties have to come together, and both parties have to experience this shift in perspective, experience the play and the power dynamics. And so like on a micro level, so I felt that transformation, right? So like even in our relationship, this idea of like, okay, how do I adjust my expectations, and how not even adjust my expectations, how do I actually critically examine what I need from people and why I need from people, and is that actually productive, right? Like, is it really necessary for you to be as, quickly and, super responsive to everything? And so in that sense, and in doing that critical sort of reflection, right, that brings about this concept of mutual transformation.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think that like the coming together of priorities is always tough, especially when there is a power dynamic difference. But one thing that we've done, I think, a good job on the campaign is that there's a lot that happens, and there's a lot that you can worry about, on a day-to-day basis, and really keeping that kind of northern star and guiding the campaign based on our values and our principles, and sticking to those as opposed to worrying about like what's happening on Twitter or, some political dispute that's happening in the cities, like the way that, people are turning a narrative into something that we've made a clear view on already. I think that being able to meet halfway as far as your priorities go, that's something that we've been able to do really well. And I think, make it so that the campaign can actually be fun and not totally stressful all the time.
Yeah. Well, I also appreciate that about you, because I like to have fun, and you like to have fun. And I think that we both are people who seek moments of levity. I mean, that's how I get through. I need to laugh, and I need to have moments of levity to get through.
Yeah, and I think it's totally funny. I don't know how everyone perceives the campaign from the outside looking in, But as somebody who's with you all the time and knows that, you know, you like to have fun, I'm curious as to, once especially this in-person stuff happens, if some people will finally get to actually meet you. They'll be like, oh wow, like you're you're a lot less serious than I thought you were, because, you know, we try to keep the campaign clean cut, you know, and it's I have the privilege of knowing how fun of a person you are, and I'm looking forward to you know, other people finally being able to discover that.
Yeah, I can't wait until we start doing more, and we will. You know, as like you said, vaccination rates are going up, the restrictions are going to be rolling back soon, and of course, we're going to proceed, you know, safely to make sure that, you know, people will feel safe and we're protecting folks. But yeah, like for us, we love being out, and you know, we've been talking about like our door knocking, our canvassing, like that. That is where the mutual transformation happens, right? In those face-to-face, those social interactions. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. So we're going to move on to our closing segment, our 1 minute rant. So for those of you who are listening, this is your first time. It's kind of like stole this idea from a podcast my husband listens to called Las Culturistas. And it's essentially like this 1 minute rant. We're calling this the What Bothers Me rant. And so what you do is I'm going to set a timer. We're going to time one another, Gus and I, and we're each going to rant for 1 minute and interjecting the phrase "what bothers me" as much as possible in our rant. So I will go first, and Gus will time me, and then Gus will go. So whenever you're ready, Gus.
All right, and go ahead.
So you know what bothers me? What bothers me is this like cultural ethos we have in sort of an American sense about always trying to make things better when someone says like they're not feeling well. What bothers me about that is that sometimes things just suck. And that's just what it is. It just sucks. And we don't always need to make it better. And what bothers me about the need, and I feel like there's this cultural need for things never to be challenging, is that when people are actually suffering, we don't recognize suffering. And so what bothers me about that is that we can't actually be responsive to people's suffering if we don't acknowledge that suffering exists. And so even in these small moments of being, when someone says that like, I'm having a hard time, and you say, well, at least this, well, at least that, you're not acknowledging the suffering. And maybe there's some things that we can actually change to create that. So it bothers me when we don't acknowledge people's pain.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that, you know, I've had to get better at over the years as well, because, you know, we get so caught up in everyone has their own problems, and it's really hard to put yourself in someone's shoes like that. So I certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, we've had those moments a couple times in the campaign where I've said like, no, you don't have to make it better. Like, don't worry, you don't have to make it better. It's just not good. So, and I'm okay with it. Yeah. Okay. You got your topic?
Yep.
All right. This is Gus Ricksecker, What Bothers Me, and your time starts now.
What bothers me is that in order for anything to move forward, you need a certain level of middle class participation and investment. And oftentimes, because the middle class is comprised, or the upper middle class is comprised of largely, you know, white and suburban people, issues like public transportation or homelessness advocacy, the ones that really aren't sexy, the ones that are viewed as like the poor problems, so to say, they take an extremely long time to move along. And oftentimes when they're transformed in ways that cater to different populations than the ones that they're essentially meant to serve. And so what really bothers me is that there's a lot of issues and room for improvement that we have in our society that in other countries is viewed as like essential rights. And in America, we need this kind of capital investment out of the middle and upper middle class that oftentimes just doesn't happen. And so
I love it. It's usually so funny for folks. You can't see Gus's face, but I was holding the timer, and as it was like 5 seconds, your eyes got really big. You're like,
Gotta figure out a way to close this out.
No, I just think that your rant is really an example of how thoughtful you are and how much your values align with my values, because that is exactly right. And again, I just loved the point you made about when these issues are addressed, they're addressed to cater to a population that's not impacted by the work. And again, but I think that's loosely related to acknowledging pain, acknowledging the suffering and the experience of someone. So
yeah, no, I mean, whether you ride the bus or not, you should care about whether or not your city has robust transportation services. And I think, like, you know, a result of not having that is that, you know, you get something like issue 7 passed. And now if we're not careful, then, you know, who will those improvements actually serve? You know, now that we know the money is going in, who's going to be the loudest voices? You know, we pretty much know that, but whether or not the issue 7 really serves the people who need it most, that's going to take strong leadership that's listening, that's doing a concerted effort to listen to the community members that need it the most. So.
That's a great point. And I just remember, and you know, going back to thinking about social media, you remember we had a moment in social media where someone was like, "Hey, candidates, what's your relationship? Do you ride the bus in Cincinnati?" And I was honest, I don't ride the bus in Cincinnati because my job is one where I'm required to be, you know, I'm tied to my job. I have a meeting, you know, here, and I have a meeting there. This is sort of like pre-COVID. Starting to open it back up. I drive to Columbus. I drive to Cleveland and Detroit. But I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I started taking the bus to school in the 3rd grade. I lived in New York City. I lived in Boston. I lived in Austin, Texas for 6 years. In the first 4 years, I didn't have a car, and I used public transportation and definitely had to deal with people being like, "Why do you take the bus?" I'm like, "Because it's convenient and it's cheap. I don't make enough money to own a car and, you know, live on this bus line." But to your point, even though I'm someone that, you know, primarily drives and I don't take the bus in this city, does not mean that I don't support public transportation. And in fact, I am someone that will appreciate driving becoming kind of a pain as we reconfigure streets and we think about building cities to accommodate people and not cars, and we'll move in that shift. And so, you know, I bring that up to say that yes, there are ways in which we all have to care about issues, even if we don't directly impacting those issues, because we don't know, you know, what the future holds, and we don't know, you know, where we would live and how that impacts. So you're right, that narrowness of thinking does get in the way.
Absolutely.
All right, Gus. Well, this has been a blast. And for our listeners, right before we started, Gus was like, "Okay, what are we going to talk about?" I was like, "I'm just going to ask you some questions."
No, it turned into a great conversation. I'm glad that I could be part of this finally.
Yeah. And so I will probably talk to you 10 minutes after we get off this call, and then I'm going to see you in a couple hours for our regular meeting. So enjoy the 45 minutes without talking to me.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Take care.
Okay.